shot her.
She's the one who shot her.
Restraining order, but she shot her.
The gun in the car. The gun's in the car. Oh my fucking God!
I'm crazy in the car. How you close to this truck? Get up. You scared as hell, right? Scared as hell. She's scared, buddy.
On September 9th, 2025, in Chicago's South Loop, 31-year-old Romika Meeks Blackman was fatally shot after dropping off her son at school. The incident began as a confrontation between Romika and another woman, with conflicting reports about whether it was accidental or planned. Witnesses differ on what happened. Some say she was physically restrained. Others say she engaged in a fight. A firearm was drawn, a shot was fired, and Romika was killed. Questions remain about whether a restraining order was active, who filed it, and if it played a role. The involvement of her child's father, Carlos Lozo's Way, is also disputed. Was he restraining her or trying to stop the conflict? Despite the fatal outcome, the shooter was released without charges. The case has left critical details unresolved, raising questions about intent, accountability, and systemic failures. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin.
A grieving mother is speaking out after her daughter was shot to death in Chicago's South Loop. Tina McMiller stood this morning near Cermak and State, the same spot where 31-year-old Romika Meeks Blackman was shot and killed during a school drop-off on Monday. And she says her daughter was loving, supportive, and an amazing mother.
She loved her son. She loved me. She loved her siblings. And I loved her the same. I want justice. She didn't deserve it.
Leaders there also called for tougher action against violence and enforcement of House Bill 158. That's a state law that declares violence a public health crisis. No charges have been filed, but police had called the shooting domestic in nature.
Romika Meeks was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. She grew up in a family that held strong ties to their community, and her childhood was shaped by both the opportunities and struggles of urban life in the city. Her mother, Tina McMiller, played a central role in her life. Tina has since spoken publicly about the circumstances of her daughter's death, emphasizing the person Romika was before the tragedy.
I want justice. She didn't deserve it. Under no circumstance, my baby was dropping her baby out to school. And what hurt the most is I didn't get my morning phone call.
Family members describe Romika as a child with a bright personality and clear values. She was known to be close with her relatives, showing loyalty and dedication to family relationships. Growing up in Chicago meant that Romika was exposed to challenges common in urban environments: crime, community disputes, and limited resources, but also opportunities to grow, learn, and strive for a better life. Education was central to Romika's goals. She attended local schools and worked toward building a better future for herself and her family. She had a strong interest in healthcare and dedicated herself to pursuing a career as a nurse. Friends and family recall her commitment to studying, learning, and working towards certifications that would help her achieve this dream. Her educational path was tied to her personal aspirations. She wanted stability, a reliable income, and the ability to provide for her child. Nursing represented not only a career, but also a way to make a difference in people's lives, which was consistent with her reputation as someone who cared deeply for others. Romika was a mother of a young son, and motherhood shaped her daily routine. Her life was structured around ensuring her son's success and well-being. She was known to walk him to school, prepare his lunches, and leave him encouraging notes to motivate him. On the morning of her death, she left a handwritten note in his backpack that read, "Happy Monday, son. This is a fresh start. Always remain yourself. I love you." Neighbors and friends describe her as an outstanding mother, someone who prioritized her child above all else. Her dedication to her son became a central point in how the community viewed her life, and later her tragic death. Romika's personal life included a long-term relationship with Carlos Lozo's Way, the father of her child. Their relationship spanned years, but after their separation, tensions began to surface. Carlos entered a new relationship with Holly Johnson, and this addition complicated an already strained situation. Reports and community gossip describe conflicts between Romika and Holly, particularly surrounding parenting dynamics and Carlos's involvement. Some accounts suggest restraining orders were filed in the past, while others point to social media posts that hinted at hostility and rivalry. The triangle of interactions between Romika, Carlos, and Holly became a focal point in the story, especially as events escalated in the weeks leading up to her death. On September 9th, 2025, Romika's day began like many others. She prepared her son for school, added a handwritten note of encouragement to his backpack, and drove him to class. Her routine was consistent, and this day appeared to be no different. She drove through Chicago's South Loop, a busy area where schools, businesses, and residential spaces are intertwined. At this point, nothing seemed unusual or out of place. At approximately 9 a.m., Romika arrived near the 2200 block of South State Street. She dropped her son off safely at school. Witnesses later confirmed she was preparing to leave the area when an unexpected confrontation began. The altercation reportedly involved Holly Johnson, Carlos's current partner. Accounts differ slightly, but it is generally agreed that the confrontation was not random and was connected to ongoing disputes. Eyewitnesses described the situation as a heated verbal dispute that quickly escalated into physical violence. Reports suggest that Carlos became directly involved in the confrontation, with some witnesses alleging that he restrained Romika in a headlock during the argument. The dispute between Romika and Holly reportedly grew louder and more aggressive. Tensions that had been simmering privately now unfolded in public, in front of witnesses and bystanders. The verbal argument soon transitioned into a physical struggle. Several eyewitnesses recalled yelling, shoving, and clear hostility. The environment became chaotic, with people in the area attempting to distance themselves while others stayed to watch. At some point during the altercation, Holly Johnson allegedly retrieved a firearm from her vehicle. Witnesses reported that the weapon was brandished as the argument intensified. Within moments, multiple shots were fired. Romika was struck in the face. Witnesses stated that they heard more than one gunshot. Panic spread quickly in the area, with people running, shouting, and some recording the scene on their phones. Emergency services were called immediately, and paramedics arrived to provide aid. Romika was transported to Stroger Hospital in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. On the morning of September 9th, 2025, law enforcement arrived quickly at the 2200 block of South State Street in Chicago's South Loop. The call had come in just after 9 a.m., reporting that a woman had been shot in the face following a public altercation. Police units secured the scene, cordoning off the area to prevent public interference. Emergency responders transported the victim, later identified as 31-year-old Romika Meeks Blackman, to Stroger Hospital, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Officers on the scene located the alleged shooter, a female later identified by multiple outlets as a current partner of Romika's former boyfriend. She was taken into custody without further incident. The firearm believed to have been used in the shooting was also recovered. While witnesses were still scattered and unsettled, law enforcement began initial questioning to establish the sequence of events. Also present at the scene was Carlos Lozo's Way, the father of Romika's child. He was not detained but was questioned by investigators regarding his role in the confrontation and the events leading to the shooting. Early reports suggested that he may have been physically involved in restraining Romika prior to the firearm being discharged. Police documented witness statements, collected available video from bystanders, and began the process of reviewing nearby surveillance cameras. The initial law enforcement approach was procedural: secure the crime scene, remove potential threats, and begin evidence collection. At this stage, no charges were filed, and the investigation remained active with detectives seeking clarity on conflicting accounts. The incident quickly spread beyond the immediate vicinity. Chicago's media outlets began reporting within hours. identifying the shooting as another high-profile act of fatal violence in a public setting. News alerts highlighted the unusual circumstances. A mother killed just after dropping off her child at school in a dispute tied to domestic relationships. Social media escalated the public's awareness at an even faster pace. Witnesses who had recorded parts of the confrontation or its aftermath uploaded videos that were rapidly shared across platforms. The footage did not capture every detail, but provided enough to spark widespread debate over what led to the shooting. For the community, the event represented more than an isolated tragedy. The South Loop, a busy and mixed residential commercial area, had become the backdrop for another public killing. Residents and viewers across Chicago expressed concern about the frequency of disputes escalating into gunfire in broad daylight. Within hours, the case had shifted from a localized investigation to a citywide conversation. While the investigation developed, Romika's family began to respond publicly. Her mother, Tina McMiller, immediately demanded justice for her daughter's killing. In interviews with local media, she stated that accountability was necessary and that no justification could excuse what had occurred. Other family members voiced their shock at the circumstances, emphasizing the ordinary nature of the morning routine that had preceded the fatal incident. For them, the notion that a simple school drop-off ended with a homicide underscored the unpredictability of interpersonal violence. Central to their concern was Romika's young son, who had been left without a mother. Questions about his custody and care became immediate priorities for the family, even as the criminal investigation remained unresolved. The investigation moved forward with multiple accounts emerging from different parties. At the center of the case were two competing narratives, one framed around self-defense, the other around unjustified aggression. The female suspect provided a version of events that positioned her actions as necessary for her own protection. According to her statement, Romika had posed a direct threat. She cited a restraining order that she claimed was in place against Romika, using this as context for why she felt endangered. The suspect also emphasized that she was a licensed firearm carrier with a valid concealed carry permit. From her perspective, the shooting was a lawful use of deadly force to prevent harm to herself during an escalating confrontation. This account aligned with legal arguments often used in self-defense claims and became the basis for why prosecutors did not immediately authorize charges. Contradictions arose quickly through witness testimony. Several bystanders alleged that Carlos had restrained Romika in a headlock during the confrontation, leaving her vulnerable. In this version of events, the suspect did not appear to be in immediate danger, but instead took the opportunity to fire while Romika was incapacitated. Other witnesses disputed this sequence, claiming that Romika had acted aggressively and that the suspect responded to an imminent threat. Timelines also differed, with some saying the suspect retrieved a gun deliberately from her car before firing, while others claimed the weapon was already in her possession when the altercation intensified. The discrepancies in witness testimony created difficulty for law enforcement, as no single narrative was universally supported. These conflicting accounts made the classification of the shooting uncertain, raising questions about intent, provocation, and proportionality. Given the conflicting reports, law enforcement took a cautious stance. Detectives acknowledged that evidence was still being collected and that the investigation was ongoing. They confirmed that no immediate charges would be filed against the suspect until prosecutors reviewed all available materials, including video evidence, witness statements, and forensic reports. A central issue in their assessment was whether the shooting constituted lawful self-defense, unlawful homicide, or what Illinois law sometimes classifies as mutual combat. Each category carried different implications for potential charges, from dismissal of the case to manslaughter or murder indictments. The lack of immediate charges drew public scrutiny, but investigators maintained that premature conclusions could compromise the case. While law enforcement maintained neutrality, social media users filled the gap with speculation and debate. A key element driving online discussion was the circulation of Romika's handwritten note to her son from earlier that morning. The note, filled with encouragement and reminders of love, became widely shared, framing the tragedy in stark contrast to her final act as a mother. The online narrative split into two competing camps. Some emphasized the suspect's claim of self-defense, arguing that the confrontation left her with no choice. Others accuse the system of protecting the shooter, highlighting witness claims and questioning why no charges have been filed. The role of Carlos became another focal point. Many questioned his involvement, specifically allegations that he had restrained Romika during the altercation. Social media users debated whether his actions escalated the confrontation or he was attempting to prevent greater violence. As the online discussion intensified, it influenced public perception of the case. Hashtags calling for justice circulated, while others framed the event as another example of the complexities of domestic disputes turning fatal. Illinois maintains some of the strictest firearm regulations in the United States. To legally carry a concealed weapon, an individual must possess both a firearm owner's identification, FYD card, and a concealed carry license, CCL. Applicants must be at least 21 years of age, pass a background check, complete mandatory firearms training, and have no disqualifying criminal record. The law restricts concealed carry in sensitive areas, such as schools, courthouses, and public transportation. In the case involving Romika Meeks Blackman, the suspect reportedly held a concealed carry permit. This fact alone complicates the investigation, because possession of a valid permit can strengthen a defendant's claim of acting within the law when using a firearm. However, the mere possession of a license does not grant unlimited use of force. Illinois statutes on self-defense are specific. Deadly force is permitted only if the individual reasonably believes it is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to themselves or another person. The reasonable belief standard is central. Prosecutors and courts must determine whether the suspect's perception of threat was objectively justified based on circumstances. The threshold for justifiable use of deadly force is therefore high. It requires evidence that no other option could prevent the perceived harm, and that the suspect was not the aggressor in the situation. In this case, witnesses reported conflicting accounts of who initiated the altercation. Some claimed the suspect retrieved the gun after an argument escalated, while others suggested she acted in defense after being physically threatened. The investigation must determine if the suspect's decision to draw and fire a weapon met the legal standard of necessity, or if it constituted unlawful escalation. The suspect also claimed that a restraining order existed against Romika Meeks Blackman. Restraining orders, also called orders of protection in Illinois, are court-issued directives designed to prevent contact between two parties where a threat of harassment, abuse, or violence is alleged. To obtain one, an individual must file a petition in civil or criminal court, present evidence of the alleged threat, and, in some cases, appear before a judge. Emergency orders can be granted quickly, but longer-term protection requires a hearing. The validity of the claimed restraining order is central to this case. If the suspect indeed had an active order against Romika, it would support her claim that she was attempting to avoid contact and that the encounter escalated beyond her control. If no such order existed, or if it had expired, then the suspect's credibility weakens, and the narrative of self-defense becomes more difficult to sustain. Investigators must examine court records to determine whether an order was filed, when it was granted, and under what circumstances, whether Romika was ever served or notified, whether police had previously been called to enforce it. If enforcement was lacking, it highlights systemic failures. In Illinois, violations of restraining orders are supposed to trigger immediate police response. If Romika had been accused of breaching an active order, officers should have been notified and the matter addressed before violence occurred. If no enforcement was pursued, questions remain about whether opportunities to prevent the confrontation were missed. One of the most contested elements of this case is the absence of immediate criminal charges. In fatal shootings, suspects are often charged swiftly when evidence is clear. Here, prosecutors delayed. Several factors explain such caution. Probable cause. To file charges, prosecutors must believe they have probable cause to prove that a crime occurred. If witness statements conflict or evidence does not clearly identify the aggressor, probable cause may be considered insufficient. Evidentiary gaps. Investigators rely on forensic reports, autopsy findings, and ballistic analysis to reconstruct events. In this case, video evidence exists but may not capture the full context of the altercation. Without clear footage, prosecutors face uncertainty. Self-defense claims. Because the suspect asserted self-defense, prosecutors must disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a high bar, especially in Illinois where stand your ground is not explicit, but courts still recognize the right to protect oneself if retreat is not feasible. Reliance on witnesses. Witness credibility is always a factor. If accounts are contradictory or appear biased, prosecutors may hesitate to proceed until further corroboration is found. Given these complexities, potential legal outcomes include homicide charges, if prosecutors determine the suspect unlawfully escalated the confrontation; manslaughter charges, if they find she acted recklessly or excessively but without premeditation; dismissal or non-prosecution, if self-defense is deemed legally valid. At this stage, the absence of charges underscores the difficulty of applying Illinois law to cases involving interpersonal conflicts, firearms, and claims of self-defense. Following Romeka's death, her mother, Tina McMiller, has emerged as a vocal figure. She has spoken at vigils, given interviews, and directly called for legal accountability. Her demands emphasize that the case not be dismissed under claims of self-defense without full examination of the evidence. The family has also highlighted the need for stricter enforcement of laws designed to protect victims of domestic and interpersonal violence. Their stance is that systemic gaps, whether in restraining order enforcement or prosecution of violent disputes, leave victims vulnerable. Beyond legal advocacy, the family now faces a challenge of supporting Romeka's young son. Relatives have stepped forward to provide stability, while also calling for resources to ensure his emotional and educational needs are met in the aftermath of the tragedy. The community response included multiple gatherings to honor Romeka's life. A candlelight vigil was held in West Englewood, attended by family, friends, and neighbors. Attendees released balloons, displayed photographs, and shared memories. Public speeches during the vigil emphasized the need for accountability and broader change. Community leaders linked the case to Chicago's ongoing struggles with domestic violence and gun-related deaths, framing the incident as part of a larger public safety crisis. These events serve both as memorials and as platforms to demand answers from law enforcement and prosecutors. Local media outlets in Chicago provided extensive coverage of the shooting and its aftermath. Reports focused heavily on the legal uncertainty, the suspects released without charges, the investigation into self-defense claims, and the role of restraining orders. National media amplified the story when it was revealed that Romeka left a handwritten note for her son on the morning of her death. This detail brought widespread attention to the case and raised questions about how an ordinary school drop-off could end in such violence. On social media, campaigns calling for justice circulated rapidly. Hashtags such as #JusticeForRomeka gained traction, and users debated the legal implications, systemic failures, and role of those present at the scene. The combination of traditional reporting and online advocacy has kept the case in public view, adding pressure on investigators and prosecutors to deliver clarity and accountability. The immediate cause of the confrontation remains unclear. Some reports suggest it began as a verbal dispute between Romeka and another woman, allegedly the current partner of her child's father, Carlos Lozo's Way. Eyewitnesses described shouting, escalating tension, and eventual physical contact. Other accounts suggest that Romeka may have been restrained during the altercation. The uncertainty leaves open two possibilities. Was this a Chan encounter that escalated spontaneously, or was the result of ongoing conflict that reached a breaking point on that day? Without a definitive timeline or universally consistent witness testimony, the exact trigger remains a central unresolved issue. The location of the incident, near the school where Romeka dropped off her son, raises additional questions. Was the meeting coincidental, with both parties unexpectedly present at the same time, or was it a planned confrontation tied to ongoing disputes between the individuals involved? Investigators have not publicly clarified whether any communications or prior arrangements existed. This distinction is significant because it may influence the legal interpretation of intent and self-defense. A planned meeting could suggest premeditation, while a chance encounter leans toward an escalation of circumstance. The suspect claimed that a restraining order was in place against Romeka. The existence and validity of this order remain unclear. If such an order did exist, questions arise about who filed it, when it was issued, and under what circumstances. If no order was active, The claim could be a legal defense strategy rather than a documented fact. Restraining orders are designed to prevent contact between parties and reduce the risk of violence. If a valid order was active, the events of September 9th suggest a failure in its enforcement. If no order existed, then the claim becomes part of the ongoing legal contest over justification for the shooting. The role of Carlos Lozo's Way, the father of Romika's child, is another area of uncertainty. Some witness accounts claim he physically restrained Romika during the altercation, possibly holding her in a headlock. Others describe him as a bystander attempting to de-escalate the situation. If Carlos did actively restrain Romika, it raises a question of whether this action unintentionally increased her vulnerability to the shooter. Determining his precise involvement is critical for understanding the chain of events and assessing legal responsibility. If the claim that Carlos restrained Romika is accurate, this could have contributed to her inability to defend herself or escape the confrontation. Legal interpretation of such restraint could affect assessment of culpability, particularly if it limited her ability to disengage from the conflict. Despite the fatal shooting, reports indicate that the suspect was taken into custody, but released without immediate charges. This has led to widespread questioning of the legal process. Possible explanations include a lack of clear evidence, conflicting witness statements, or hesitation due to legal complexities involving self-defense claims. The decision not to file charges immediately suggests that investigators may still be evaluating whether the suspect's actions can be legally justified. In cases involving claims of self-defense, prosecutors often proceed cautiously, weighing physical evidence, testimony, and statutory requirements. This case raises concerns about systemic shortcomings. If a restraining order existed, why was it not effectively enforced? Were there prior signs of conflict that authorities failed to address? The absence of proactive intervention in high-risk domestic situations often allows tensions to escalate unchecked. Additionally, the reliance on self-defense claims in firearm cases has become a recurring issue. The threshold for justifying lethal force remains contentious, and interpretations often hinge on conflicting narratives rather than definitive evidence. The death of Romika Meeks Blackman reflects a broader trend in Chicago and other urban centers. Domestic disputes escalating into lethal gun violence. Incidents rooted in personal relationships frequently turn deadly when firearms are introduced. This case highlights the crisis of firearms being used in emotionally charged situations. The ease of access to weapons, combined with heightened tension, often turns disputes that might otherwise end in verbal conflict into fatal encounters. Several systemic failures are evident. Gaps in restraining order enforcement. If a restraining order was in place, it failed to prevent contact between the parties. Enforcement of such orders often relies on proactive monitoring, which is not always consistent. Limited intervention for high-risk situations. Domestic disputes that show patterns of escalation are often flagged too late. Early intervention mechanisms, counseling, mediation, or targeted policing, are underutilized. Over-reliance on self-defense claims. Legal systems frequently encounter difficulty distinguishing between legitimate self-defense and the misuse of the claim to justify unnecessary lethal force. This reliance creates gray areas that can delay or prevent accountability. The consequences extend beyond legal complexities. A child is left without his mother, forced to grow up with the trauma of losing her in such circumstances. A family is left demanding accountability while navigating uncertainty in the legal process. A community is again confronted with the reality of violence occurring in everyday spaces, from residential blocks to school zones. These outcomes illustrate how individual incidents ripple outward, affecting not just direct participants, but entire networks of people and neighborhoods. Romika Meeks Blackman's life was marked by resilience, ambition, and her role as a devoted mother. Her death underscores the intersection of personal conflict, systemic shortcomings, and the lethal potential of firearms in domestic disputes. The unanswered questions: what triggered the altercation, whether a restraining order existed, the role of Carlos, and why no charges have been filed, leave gaps in understanding and hinder closure. Each unresolved issue points to larger systemic challenges: weak enforcement of protective measures, limited intervention in high-risk domestic situations, and the complexities of self-defense law. Her death illustrates the broader reality of violence that continues to scar communities. It is both an individual tragedy and part of a pattern where systemic failures intersect with personal conflicts. The legacy of this case is a call for accountability, reform, and recognition of the structures that allowed such an outcome to occur. Romika's story is not just about the moment of her death, but about the larger questions it raises. Until those questions are answered, the case remains not only a personal loss, but also a reflection of unresolved societal issues that demand attention. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.